From 1878 to 1968, there were 71 lake captains that called Bayview, Wisconsin, on the shore of Lake Michigan, their home. While they lived here, they captained 195 different ships, from tugboats to schooners to steamships, in voyages that took them to every one of the Great Lakes. Join us now for another episode of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains, where we explore not only these captains, but also their ships, their homes, their families, and their lifetime of sailing adventures on the Great Lakes.
Well, welcome back everyone to another episode of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains, where we talk about all 71 different lake captains that once lived in Bayview in the age of sail and steam between 1878 and 1968. This particular home was once occupied by Rudolph Morbeck, Captain Rudolph Morbeck. And what's really interesting about him, like all the others are equally interesting, but for Rudolph, he once, well, I'll let our narrator tell you, but he survived the sinking on a ship with his brother. It's really quite interesting. And not just any ship, but one of Bayview's previously unknown Christmas tree ships. We had two here, at least two, possibly three. And the one that Rudolph was aboard is a brand new discovery, so I hope you'll enjoy that. But even more than that, the thing about Rudolph Morbeck that is really interesting is he was essentially the yacht captain to the rich and famous. And he captained different yachts for different wealthy and famous people, including one in Bayview. So, hope you'll enjoy it. Don't forget, this video is a production of the Historic Bayview Lake Captains Society. We have no employees. We're trying to raise money for a ship captain's plaque with all the lake captains' names on it in Bayview to be put in a prominent location up on East Lincoln Avenue where the most captains lived, opposite Sugar Maple Pub. I don't get any of the money, so 100% of the money that you give to us, contribute to us, because we're not tax deductible, but all that money will go to that plaque and that dog sculpture representing the hero dog that rescued all those lives on the Detroit River all those years ago, and has a special episode devoted to it. Okay, check out our website too. We have free walking tours using only your phone of all the captain's houses It's an interactive website. Go there, see where the houses are. Go there with your phone, listen to the narration. I think you'll enjoy it. That's all for today, folks. Take care, and remember, hats off to all our Bayview Lake captains. Bye-bye.
Welcome to another installment of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains, where we discuss the lives of the 71 different lake captains that once lived in Bayview, Wisconsin, during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, in the age of sail and steam. This discussion will include their ships, their homes, their families, and their lifetime of sailing adventures on the Great Lakes. Here is the map of lake captains' homes in Bayview, to show you where this episode takes place. Its location focuses primarily on the large green arrow. Today we will be discussing the life of Captain Rudolph Morbeck, who, along with his brother Charles Morbeck, discussed in a previous episode, immigrated from Sweden in 1885 and became Bayview Lake captains. Early on, as crew members, they both survived the sinking during a storm of one of Bayview's Christmas tree ships. That three-masted schooner was subsequently raised from the lake bed, repaired, and purchased by Rudolph and brother Charles, who continued sailing it. Rudolph then switched from sailing cargo ships to become a full-time captain of the personal racing and pleasure sailing yachts of two of Milwaukee's industrial titans, August and Joseph Uihlein, and Bruno Nordberg, who also lived in Bayview. This made Rudolph Morbeck one of only 3 Bayview Lake captains to become professional full-time pleasure yacht captains for Milwaukee's rich and famous. These other 2 captains will be discussed in future episodes. During the course of his captaining one of these yachts, Rudolph Morbeck also rescued 2 men whose rowboat had overturned 3 miles out into Lake Michigan and were near drowning. Rudolph Morbeck thus became one of many Bayview Lake captains to rescue and save the lives of many people out on the lakes. Captain Rudolph Morbeck was born in Gotland, Sweden, on 15th of July, 1866. He immigrated with his older brother Charles in 1885, and became a naturalized citizen on 14th of April, 1893, aged 27. Rudolph's initial whereabouts during this time, while not specifically known, was most likely Milwaukee, due to his connection with the Milwaukee schooner Vernie M. Blake, 1889, which he co-owned with older brother Charles, who likely captained it, and one other person. Then, likely in 1890, he and Charles joined together to purchase and operate the schooner Minnehaha through 1897. Rudolph appears to have taken over as the sole operator, though still co-owned with Charles, of the Minnehaha, probably also serving as its captain, while Charles departed briefly to captain the schooner Southside from 1893 to 94. Charles then returned to join with Rudolph on the Minnehaha after the Southside sank in 1894, with Charles aboard as captain, who survived. Unfortunately, Rudolph and Charles would lose the Minnehaha when they defaulted on a personal debt of $135 in August 1897, for which they had used the schooner as collateral. From the start of 1897 up until mid-August 1897, when the Minnehaha was seized, Rudolph was found for the first time living in Bayview, where he would remain for the rest of his life. The first of his several different Bayview addresses was 2323 South Burrell Street, from 1897 to 99, where, up to August 1897, he was co-captain, co-owner of the Minnehaha, shared with his brother. After mid-August 1897, when the Minnehaha was foreclosed upon, Rudolph temporarily left the sailing profession and was found working as a labourer and machinist. Early in 1900, he moved to 809 East Bay Street, employed as a janitor. It may also have been during this time that he became a rigger boss at the Illinois steel plant for several years, though his dates there are unknown. Then the June 1900 U.S. Census shows him suddenly working again as a sailor, ship unknown, living at 809 East Bay Street. Given that he and brother Charles had a prior history of owning and sailing ships together, such as the schooners Verney M. Blake and the Minnehaha, it's entirely possible, if not probable, that Rudolph gave up his janitor job he had at the start of the year to move over and help crew the schooner Vermont, where his brother Charles was mate, and bay viewer Hans Hansen was the owner and captain. The Vermont sank 5 months later, during a storm in November 1900, north of Green Bay in Big Bay de Noc, with a cargo of Christmas trees. Captain Hans Hansen and his mate Charles Morbeck, the last listed crew aboard, appear to have gone down with it. Rudolph Morbeck very likely was with them. All 3 of these Bayview Lake captains survived, and the ship was soon thereafter raised from the shallow water. Rudolph was still living at 809 East Bay Street at the time of the sinking. After the Vermont was raised from the shallow water, it was purchased from Hans Hansen by Charles and Rudolph Morbeck, who likely took turns captaining it, as they had done with the schooner Minnehaha, through December 1901. It's entirely possible, if not probable, that they used it once again to bring Christmas trees down to Bayview, but that is not confirmed. In 1902, Rudolph Morbeck made a significant change. Instead of captaining lake schooners, he decided to switch over to captain racing yachts, the only Bayview Lake captain documented to have done so professionally. At the start of the sailing season that year, the famous Uihlein family of Milwaukee, specifically August and his son Joseph, purchased the 1-year-old racing sloop Illinois that had been custom designed and built the previous year in Boston for a Chicago owner. The Illinois had a hull of mahogany. Such was Rudolph's outstanding reputation in the sailing community that the Uihleins selected him to captain it for them. He is documented to have done so beginning in 1902, and likely continued through 1906. He won at least one race, captaining the Illinois. During this time, 1902 to 05, Rudolph's residences are unknown, possibly still 809 East Bay Street, where he was in 1900. In August 1903, tragedy struck when Rudolph's brother Charles was drowned when the schooner he was sailing aboard as first mate, the Tenny and Laura, sank in a storm off Port Washington, Wisconsin. This was the 3rd ship that sank while Charles Morbeck was aboard. He survived the first 2 sinkings, but not this time. He was 41 years old, and his body was never found. Charles had been a Bayview Lake captain, and there is already an episode about him on the channel. In 1906, Rudolph finally settled down with his young family at 1302 East Idaho Street in Bayview, where he would remain for the next 22 years, 1906 to 1928. Then, the next year, 1907, he got an offer from another famous and wealthy industrialist, Bruno Nordberg, who wanted Rudolph to captain his racing and family pleasure sailing yacht Merlin. Rudolph accepted. Bayview's Rudolph Morbeck had now officially become the captain of choice for the sailing yachts of the rich and famous. For the next 31 years, when he retired after the 1938 sailing season at age 72, Captain Morbeck remained captain of Bruno Nordberg's yachts, starting with the Merlin in 1907, and then later, after the elder Bruno died in 1924, continuing as captain of the Merlin for Nordberg's son through the probable sailing season of 1927, when another Nordberg family sailing yacht was purchased in 1928 to replace it, the Clio. Rudolph Morbeck captained both sailing yachts for exciting racing victories, as well as many family cruises round the Great Lakes. In 1929, he moved with his family to 3143 South California Street, which would remain his home until his death in 1941. His next-door neighbour while here was fellow Bayview Lake Captain Roland Martin. There will be a dedicated episode to Captain Martin later on this channel. Rudolph Morbeck married his wife Minnie in 1896, during the heyday and great days that he and brother Charles were sailing and operating the schooner Minnehaha. They had 5 children, 3 boys, Edwin, Irving and Walter, and 2 girls, Jessie and Marie. In 1941, Captain Rudolph B. Morbeck died. He'd had an amazing life, surviving a sinking as a crewman on one of Bayview's Christmas tree ships, rescuing 2 men from drowning, then captaining schooners until he became the personal racing and pleasure yacht captain of not one but 2 of Milwaukee's industrial titans. Captain Morbeck's sailing exploits over the years were often reported in Milwaukee newspapers. In all, he ranks 6th among Bayview Lake captains in terms of total years sailing, with 55 years, 43 as a captain and 38 as a Bayview Lake captain. Perhaps most amazing is, he accomplished all of this with just a 6th-grade education. Thanks for watching. This photograph isn't about Bayview or its lake captains, but it's from the same era of Great Lakes maritime history. We thought we'd close with it for enjoyment, as it captures the spirit of the era. In addition, this channel and its matching website also plan to support various maritime history projects related to Bayview's lake captains. One of these is a plaque and marker with the captains' names and addresses on it, as part of the creation of the Bayview Lake Captains Historic District, which will be the first of its kind in America. If you would like to donate to support these projects, to include this and other markers honouring Bayview's lake captains, with 100% of all donations and contributions in all forms going to support them, please consider donating to us through the listings shown next. If, for some reason, we are unable to secure these markers, then all funds donated to this site will be given as a cash donation to the museum ship SS City of Milwaukee in Manistee, Michigan. That is the only surviving intact ship once captained by at least 2 and likely 3 different Bayview Lake captains. I'm Simon Stanhope, narrator for these episodes. Join us again soon for the next chapter of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains.